A millionaire visits his ex and is heartbroken to find his 7-year-old daughter crying while cleaning the floor. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome home to Mr. Peter Stories. Before we begin today, let me say something I don't say lightly. You are my heart's greatest treasure. You're not just viewers. You are my safe place, my comfort, my inspiration. If my voice still lives in your heart, please comment, "I am here," and like this video. You don't owe me anything. But when you show up without me asking, it brings tears to my eyes. I feel the love, I feel the bond, and I feel proud of what we've built. Together, you are not forgotten, you are not invisible. I see you, I feel you, and I thank God for every single one of you. If you're hurting, if you're tired, if life feels heavy, I am holding you right now in spirit. Now, receive this prayer. Like music in your soul, may the winds of peace find your window. May the light of grace kiss your doorstep. May you be wrapped in the kind of love that heals without needing to speak. May your nights be gentle, your mornings be kind, and your journey be filled with small miracles. May every scar become a story of survival, and may joy return to your spirit like sunlight through clouds. And above all, may you always know you are worthy of every good thing this life has to offer. Let's begin, side by side, with love that never fades. One voice, one family, one heart. 8 years ago. The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the marble floor of the Hubble mansion as 28-year-old Richard Hubble stared blankly at the ornate mirror in his bedroom. His green eyes, once sharp with intelligence, now held the glazed look of a man walking through life in a medicated haze. The pills his mother gave him every morning had become as routine as breathing, little white tablets that she called his vitamins, but which kept his mind wrapped in chemical fog. Timeline: 8 years ago, Richard is 28, about to marry 19-year-old Tessa. "Richard, darling, time for your medicine," came the silky voice from his doorway. Sophia Hubble glided into the room like a predator in designer heels, her perfectly manicured fingers clutching a silver tray with his daily dose of control. At 52, she was still strikingly beautiful, but there was something cold and reptilian behind her smile, something that would have terrified anyone not already under her spell. "I don't feel well today, Mother," Richard mumbled, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for the glass of water. "My head feels foggy." Sophia's eyes flashed with something dangerous before her expression smoothed back into maternal concern. "Oh, sweetheart, that's exactly why you need your vitamins. You've been under so much stress with the business." She pressed the pills into his palm, her fingers lingering possessively on his skin. "You know what happens when you don't take them, don't you? Remember when you were 16 and tried to rebel?" Richard's face went pale. Even through the chemical fog, the memory of those 6 months in the psychiatric ward remained vivid. The padded walls, the restraints, the endless injections, while his mother visited weekly to whisper about how disappointed she was in his breakdown. She had told everyone he'd had a mental collapse, but Richard sometimes wondered, in his clearer moments, if he'd simply tried to escape her suffocating control. "That's my good boy," Sophia purred as he swallowed the pills without further protest. "Now we have important business to discuss. Your bride will be arriving this afternoon." Richard blinked slowly, struggling to process her words. "Bride? Yes, darling. I've arranged everything perfectly." Sophia's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp. "Her name is Tessa Ray, a beautiful little chocolate girl whose family owes some very dangerous people a great deal of money. $2 million to be exact." She began pacing around him like a shark circling wounded prey. Her stepmother was quite eager to settle the debt by offering her stepdaughter's services. "I don't understand," Richard said, though part of him, the buried part that still remembered who he used to be, felt sick at his mother's casual cruelty. Sophia stopped directly in front of him, placing her hands on his shoulders with deceptive gentleness. She's just a breeding mare, darling. Use her. Get an heir to secure your grandfather's inheritance, then dispose of her, just like I taught you with your pets when you were little. Richard flinched at the memory. When he was 8, Sophia had given him a puppy for Christmas, let him love it for months, then forced him to watch as she drowned it in the bathtub. Love makes you weak, Richard, she had told him as he sobbed. The strong take what they want and discard what they don't need. But, Mother, marriage is supposed to be what? Love? Sophia laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Love is for the weak, Richard. I've spent 28 years making sure you're strong. Don't disappoint me now. 3 hours later, Richard stood in the mansion's grand foyer, swaying slightly from his increased medication dosage as a rusted sedan pulled up the circular driveway. He watched through the floor-to-ceiling windows as a heavy-set woman with bleached hair and dead eyes dragged a young black woman from the passenger seat. Tessa Ray was 19 and heartbreakingly beautiful, with smooth, dark skin and large, frightened eyes that seemed to see too much. Her simple cotton dress was clean but cheap, and she clutched a small suitcase like a lifeline. Even through his medicated haze, Richard felt something stir in his chest, something his mother had tried to kill but never quite succeeded in destroying. Carmen, Tessa's stepmother, practically shoved the girl up the marble steps. "Here she is, just like we agreed," she said to Sophia, her voice rough from years of chain-smoking and harder drugs. "Pure as driven snow, though not for much longer, eh?" "Excellent," Sophia replied, her gaze appraising Tessa like livestock. "Richard, come meet your wife." Tessa's eyes found Richard's, and for a moment something passed between them, a recognition of shared suffering, perhaps, or simply two drowning people seeing each other in the depths. She was so young, so vulnerable, and despite the chemicals clouding his mind, Richard felt an unfamiliar urge to protect her. "Hello," Tessa whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm Tessa." "Richard," he managed, his tongue feeling thick in his mouth. I'm sorry." "Sorry for what?" Sophia's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "Richard, darling, you're being ridiculous. Miss Ray, you'll be staying in the servants' quarters until the wedding tomorrow. I trust you understand your position here." Tessa's chin lifted slightly, a tiny act of defiance that Richard admired despite himself. "I understand that my stepmother sold me to pay her debts. I understand that I have no choice, but I won't pretend to be grateful." Carmen backhanded Tessa across the face so hard the girl stumbled. "Mind your tongue, girl. These people own you. Now." "That's quite enough," Sophia said smoothly, though her eyes glittered with amusement. "Violence should be saved for private moments. Richard, escort your bride to her room. The wedding is at 10 tomorrow morning." The wedding was a mockery of everything sacred, held in the mansion's private chapel with only a bought and paid for judge and a handful of Sophia's society friends as witnesses. It lasted less than 15 minutes. Tessa wore a simple white dress that Sophia had chosen, modest and cheap, designed to emphasize her status as a purchased commodity rather than a beloved bride. Richard, heavily medicated and barely coherent, spoke his vows in a monotone while Sophia watched from the front pew like a spider admiring her web. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Richard's kiss was gentle, the only kindness Tessa had received since arriving at the mansion. The reception was held in the mansion's ballroom, though reception was too generous a term for what amounted to Sophia's friends drinking expensive champagne while making snide comments about the charity case Richard had married. Tessa sat alone at the head table, ignored by everyone except the occasional cruel stare or whispered slur. She was picking at her untouched dinner when a large hand settled on her shoulder. Tessa looked up to see a man in his 50s with Richard's eyes, but none of his medicated gentleness. This was David Hubble, Sophia's brother, and the way he looked at her made her skin crawl. Little sister-in-law. David said, his breath reeking of whiskey and something darker. "You look lonely. Why, don't we go somewhere quiet and get better acquainted?" "I'm fine here, thank you," Tessa replied, trying to keep her voice steady. David's grip tightened on her shoulder, his fingers digging into her skin. "I wasn't asking, sweetheart. Sophia and I have an understanding about family hospitality." Before Tessa could protest, David was pulling her from her chair. She looked desperately toward Richard, but he was slumped in his seat, unconscious from whatever Sophia had slipped into his drink. No one else seemed to notice or care as David dragged her from the ballroom and down a dark corridor toward the mansion's guest wing. "Please," Tessa whispered as he pushed her into a bedroom and locked the door behind them. "Please, don't do this." David's smile was a mirror of his sister's, beautiful and absolutely without mercy. "Welcome to the family, little girl. Let me show you how we treat our new toys." What happened next would haunt Tessa for the rest of her life. David's assault was brutal and deliberate, designed not just to violate her body, but to break her spirit. When it was over, he left her bleeding and sobbing on the guest room floor with a final whispered threat. "Tell anyone about this, and I'll make sure both you and that drugged-up husband of yours disappear. Sophia owns the police, the judges, and everyone else who matters in this city." Hours later, Tessa finally found the strength to return to the bedroom she was supposed to share with Richard. He was still unconscious, sprawled across the bed in his wedding suit, completely unaware of what had happened to his new wife. Tessa stood in the doorway, watching the man she'd been sold to like cattle, and felt something die inside her chest. She was trapped in a house of monsters, married to a man too broken to protect her, carrying the child of either her husband or his uncle, and there was no escape. As she finally crawled into bed beside Richard's unconscious form, Tessa placed a protective hand over her still flat stomach and made a promise that would sustain her through the hell to come. Whatever it cost her, whatever she had to endure, she would protect the innocent life growing inside her. Even if it killed her, she would not let these monsters destroy her child the way they had destroyed everything else they touched. This baby would be her salvation, her reason to survive, her hope for a future beyond the darkness that had swallowed her whole. Outside their bedroom window, storm clouds gathered over the Hubble mansion, and somewhere in the depths of the house, Sophia Hubble smiled in her sleep, already planning the systematic destruction of the young woman who dared to enter her son's life. The web was complete. Now the real horror could begin. Chapter 2. The Poisoned Son and Broken Wife. 7 years and 9 months ago, 3 months after the wedding. The morning after her wedding night, Tessa woke to find Richard's side of the bed empty and cold. The brutal events of the previous evening crashed over her like a devastating tsunami. David's assault, the threats, the shattering realization that she was completely alone in a house full of predators. Her body ached in places she didn't want to acknowledge, and the metallic taste of terror coated her tongue. A soft knock on the door made her heart race. "Come in," she whispered, pulling the sheets up to her chin. Richard entered carrying a breakfast tray, his movements still sluggish from whatever Sophia had drugged him with the night before. His green eyes were clearer than they'd been yesterday, but still held that medicated haze that seemed to follow him everywhere. "I brought you something to eat," he said quietly, setting the tray on the bedside table. I don't remember much. About last night. Did I hurt you?" The genuine concern in his voice nearly broke Tessa's resolve to stay strong. "No," she lied, because the truth would either destroy him or get them both killed. "You didn't hurt me." Richard's shoulders sagged with relief. "Good. When I take my medicine, I lose time. I was afraid." He trailed off, studying her face with sudden intensity. "You've been crying." Before Tessa could respond, Sophia's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. "Richard, where are you, darling? Time for your vitamins." The change in Richard was immediate and heartbreaking. His face went blank, his posture straightened into something mechanical, and the brief spark of humanity Tessa had glimpsed vanished behind a wall of pharmaceutical fog. "I have to go," he said in a monotone voice, already moving toward the door. "Mother needs me." Downstairs, in Sophia's private study, the morning ritual began. Richard sat in a leather chair like an obedient child, while his mother prepared his daily dose of control. Today, however, she had increased the dosage, 2 additional pills that would ensure he remained compliant during the delicate early stages of her plan. "Open wide, my precious boy," Sophia cooed, placing the pills on his tongue before holding a crystal glass of water to his lips. "Drink it all down. That's my good son." As Richard swallowed, Sophia's fingers traced his jawline with disturbing intimacy. "You know, darling, I've been thinking about your new wife. She seems resistant, defiant even." "She's just scared," Richard mumbled, already feeling the increased medication taking effect. "It's a lot to adjust to." Sophia's smile was sharp as a scalpel. "Oh, my sweet boy, you're so naive. Women like her are manipulative by nature. She's probably already plotting to turn you against me, to make you choose between your wife and your mother." Her voice dropped to a hypnotic whisper. "But you know what happens to people who try to come between us, don't you?" Richard's eyes glazed over further as the drugs hit his system. "Yes, mother. Tell me what happens, darling." They disappear," Richard recited like a trained parrot. "Like the puppy. Like the gardener who smiled at you too much. Like father." "Exactly." Sophia pressed a kiss to his forehead, her lipstick, leaving a red mark like a brand of ownership. "Tessa is trying to poison you against me. Look how she flinches when you touch her. She's probably already cheating, spreading her legs for the first man who shows her attention." The medication made Richard's thoughts sluggish, but somewhere deep inside, a voice screamed that this was wrong. That voice was quickly drowned out by the chemical tide washing through his brain. "I want you to watch her carefully," Sophia continued, her hands resting possessively on his shoulders. "And when she inevitably betrays you, because she will, darling, they always do, you'll know exactly what needs to be done." Flashback. Richard at age 8. The memory surfaced unbidden as Richard sat in his mother's study, triggered by the familiar smell of her perfume and the weight of her hands on his shoulders. He was 8 years old again, standing in the bathroom of their old house, watching in horror as Sophia held his beloved puppy Max under the bath water. "Please, Mama, please don't." Little Richard had sobbed, reaching desperately for his pet. "I'll be good. I promise I'll be good." "This is what happens when you love something more than you love me," Sophia had said calmly, her perfectly manicured hands never wavering as Max's struggles grew weaker. "Love is weakness, Richard. Love is betrayal. I'm teaching you to be strong." When Max finally went still, Sophia had lifted Richard's chin with her wet hand. "Do you understand now, baby? Everything you love will eventually hurt you. Everything except Mama. Mama is the only one who will never leave you, never betray you, never stop loving you, but only if you're a good boy, only if you choose me first, always." 8-year-old Richard had nodded through his tears, not understanding that his mother was systematically destroying his capacity for love, molding him into the weapon she needed him to become. Present day. "Richard? Richard, darling, are you listening to me?" Sophia's voice snapped him back to the present, where he sat like a drugged statue in her study. "Yes, Mother, I'm listening." "Good. Now I have a special job for your wife. She needs to understand her place in this household." Sophia's smile was predatory. "I think some honest work will be good for her character." An hour later, Tessa found herself kneeling on the marble floor of the mansion's grand foyer, scrubbing with a brush that seemed designed more for torture than cleaning. At 3 months pregnant, the position was agony, but the alternative, Sophia's promised consequences, was worse. "You missed a spot," came Sophia's crisp voice from above. Tessa looked up to see the older woman standing over her, elegant in a Chanel suit that probably cost more than most people made in a year. "Right there, by your dirty little hands." Tessa bit back her response and continued scrubbing. The ammonia-based cleaner made her morning sickness worse, but she forced herself to keep working. For the baby. Everything was for the baby now. "I know what you're thinking," Sophia said conversationally, circling Tessa like a shark. "You think this is temporary. You think once you pop out that little bastard you're carrying, Richard will suddenly grow a spine and stand up to me." She laughed, the sound echoing off the marble walls. "Oh, my dear, you have no idea how thoroughly I've broken my son." "He's not broken," Tessa whispered before she could stop herself. The words had barely left her lips when Sophia's designer heel connected with her ribs, sending her sprawling across the wet floor. "Excuse me? Did you just contradict me in my own house?" Tessa struggled to get back to her hands and knees, her side throbbing where Sophia had kicked her. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" "You didn't mean to what? Speak out of turn?" "Question my authority?" Sophia grabbed a handful of Tessa's hair, yanking her head back. "Let me tell you about Richard, you stupid girl. I've been feeding him psychiatric medication since he was 15 years old. Cocktails of antipsychotics, mood stabilizers, and sedatives that have turned his brain into putty. He doesn't remember half the things he does. And what he does remember is filtered through a haze of chemicals that make him completely dependent on me." Tessa's eyes widened in horror. "You're poisoning your own son?" "I'm protecting him," Sophia snarled. "From weakness, from distraction, from little whores like you who think they can waltz in here and steal him away from me." She released Tessa's hair, sending her sprawling again. "Richard is mine. He's always been mine. And when your bastard child is born, I'll make sure it understands its place too." The months that followed were a carefully orchestrated nightmare. Sophia increased Richard's medication whenever he showed signs of independent thought, especially if he expressed concern for Tessa's welfare. She forced Tessa to work increasingly demanding physical labor as her pregnancy progressed, scrubbing floors, carrying heavy laundry baskets, cleaning windows while balanced on ladders. Richard, lost in his pharmaceutical fog, barely seemed to notice his wife's deteriorating condition. When he did express concern, Sophia was quick to redirect his attention. "She's being dramatic, darling," she would purr, stroking his hair as he sat in her study like a trained pet. "Pregnancy makes women manipulative. She's trying to make you feel guilty, so you'll choose her over me. You're not going to fall for such an obvious trick, are you?" By her 8th month, Tessa was exhausted, malnourished, and desperate. She tried, calling her stepmother Carmen for help, only to be told that her debt was transferred to the Hubbles now. She attempted to contact social services, but Sophia's connections ran deep, and somehow her calls were never returned. The night Tessa went into labor, she was alone in the basement laundry room, folding Richard's shirts while contractions rippled through her swollen belly. She made it halfway up the stairs before the pain doubled her over, her water breaking on the marble steps. "Help!" she called out, her voice echoing through the empty mansion. "Please, someone help me!" But the only person who heard was Sophia, who appeared at the top of the stairs like an avenging angel in a silk nightgown. "Oh dear," she said with mock concern. "Is it time already?" "The baby's coming," Tessa gasped, clutching the banister. "I need to get to the hospital." "Hospital?" Sophia laughed. "Oh, my sweet child, I don't think so. You see, if you're carrying my son's heir, then you'll survive this just fine. And if you're carrying some other man's bastard," she shrugged elegantly, Well, nature has a way of sorting these things out. With that, Sophia turned and walked away, leaving Tessa to collapse on the cold basement floor as her labor intensified. For the next 12 hours, she endured the most difficult experience of her life completely alone, with only the concrete beneath her and her own determination to keep her going. When Angel finally emerged, small, perfect, and screaming, with the fury of someone who had fought hard to enter this world, Tessa cradled her daughter against her chest and wept. The baby had Richard's eyes and Tessa's stubborn chin, and in that moment, Tessa knew with absolute certainty that this child was worth every moment of suffering she had endured. "Hello, my angel," she whispered, her tears falling onto the baby's tiny face. "Mama's here. Mama will always be here." Upstairs, Sophia smiled as she listened to the sounds of new life echoing from the basement. Soon she would know whether the child was worth keeping or whether it would need to be disposed of. But for now, she had more pressing matters to attend to, like making sure Richard never remembered where he'd been when his supposed child was being born. Chapter 3. The Ultimate Destruction. 7 years ago. 3 weeks after Angel's birth, Tessa was finally strong enough to climb the basement stairs. Her body still ached from giving birth alone on the concrete floor, but her daughter needed proper care, warmth, and medical attention. She wrapped Angel in the thin blanket Sophia had mockingly provided, a rough wool thing that scratched the baby's delicate skin, and made her way to the main floor of the mansion. She found Richard in the library, staring blankly at financial reports, while his untouched breakfast grew cold beside him. The sight of him sitting there, clean and comfortable, while she had nearly died giving birth to his child, sparked a flame of anger in Tessa's chest. "Richard," she said softly, not wanting to startle him, "I'd like you to meet your daughter." He looked up slowly, his green eyes struggling to focus through the pharmaceutical haze. When his gaze landed on the tiny bundle in Tessa's arms, something flickered across his face, surprise, wonder, perhaps even love. For a moment the medication seemed to clear, and Tessa saw a glimpse of the man he might have been without his mother's poison. "She's beautiful," he whispered, reaching out with trembling fingers to touch Angel's tiny hand. "She has your nose and your eyes," Tessa said, hope blooming in her chest for the first time in months. "Richard, she needs proper care, a crib, baby formula, medical checkups." "Of course," Richard said, his voice stronger than she'd heard it in weeks. "Whatever she needs, whatever you both need." He stood up, swaying slightly but determined. "I'll call Dr. Morrison, and we'll need to set up a nursery." "Richard, darling, what's all this commotion?" Sophia's voice cut through the moment like a blade through silk. She glided into the library wearing an immaculate cream-colored dress, her perfectly styled hair not showing a single strand out of place. Her eyes immediately fixed on the baby in Tessa's arms, and her expression shifted from curiosity to something far more dangerous. "Mother, meet your granddaughter," Richard said, his voice already beginning to slur as the morning's medication kicked in. "Isn't she perfect?" Sophia hummed, circling them like a predator studying potential prey. "She's certainly small. Premature, perhaps." "She's not premature," Tessa said firmly. "She's exactly where she should be developmentally." Sophia's smile was razor-sharp. "Of course, dear. I'm sure you would know." She turned to Richard, her hand settling possessively on his arm. "Darling, we need to discuss some important matters. Business that requires your full attention." "But Angel can wait," Sophia finished smoothly. "Tessa, take the child back to your room. Richard and I have work to do." In Sophia's private study, the real work began. Richard sat in his usual chair, while his mother prepared not just his regular medication, but an additional cocktail of drugs that would make him more suggestible, more paranoid, and completely unable to form coherent memories. "Drink this, darling," she said, handing him a glass of what looked like orange juice but tasted metallic and bitter. "It's a special vitamin blend. You've been under so much stress lately." As Richard drank, Sophia opened a manila folder and spread several documents across her desk. DNA test results, printed on official letterhead from the city's most prestigious medical laboratory. Results that had cost her $50,000 to fabricate, but which would be worth every penny. "I have some disturbing news, my love," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I had that child tested, just to be safe. The results. Well, see for yourself." Richard's drugged mind struggled to process the papers she placed in front of him. The words swam on the page, but the conclusion was clear enough. Probability of paternity, 0.00%. "I don't understand," he mumbled, his speech becoming increasingly slurred. "How is this possible?" "Oh, my poor boy," Sophia crooned, moving behind his chair to massage his shoulders with disturbing intimacy. "That little whore has been playing you for a fool from the very beginning. The child isn't yours. She's been spreading her legs for God knows who while you've been working to provide for her. But she was here, in the house. When could she... Men come and go from this estate all the time, darling. Gardeners, delivery boys, repair workers, any one of them could be the father of that bastard child." Sophia's fingers tightened on his shoulders. "I tried to warn you, didn't I? I told you she was manipulative, that she was using you, but you wouldn't listen to your mother. The drugs were making Richard's thoughts muddy and paranoid. Fragments of memories, or were they dreams, flickered through his mind. Tessa flinching when he touched her, her tears on their wedding night, her defiance when Sophia tried to discipline her. "She never loved me," he said, his voice hollow. "She was just using me." "That's right, baby," Sophia whispered, her breath hot against his ear. "But Mama is here. Mama will always protect you from women like her. All you have to do is trust me, like you always have." The confrontation came that evening, during the worst snowstorm in decades. Richard, heavily drugged and filled with his mother's poison, burst into the bedroom, where Tessa was feeding Angel with a bottle of formula she'd managed to scrounge from the kitchen. "You lying whore!" he screamed, the vicious words foreign in his mouth, but spilling out anyway, programmed by hours of Sophia's psychological manipulation. "You made a fool of me!" Tessa looked up in shock, Angel still in her arms. "Richard, what are you talking about?" "The baby!" He threw the DNA results at her feet, the papers scattering like broken promises. "She's not mine. You've been cheating on me, haven't you? Spreading your legs for every man who looks at you." That's not true." Tessa's eyes filled with tears as she clutched Angel protectively. "Richard, I've never been with anyone but you, and—" She stopped herself before mentioning David's assault, knowing it would only make things worse. "Liar!" Richard's hand shot out, striking her across the face, hard enough to make her ears ring. The blow sent her stumbling backward, and she nearly dropped Angel before catching herself. "Please," she whispered, her cheek burning where he'd hit her. "Please, just listen to me. I can explain everything." But Richard was beyond listening. The drugs had made him paranoid and violent, exactly as Sophia had intended. "Get out," he snarled. "Get out of my house. Take your bastard and get out." "Richard, it's snowing. It's below freezing outside. Angel is just 3 weeks old. I said, get out!" He grabbed Tessa by the arm, dragging her toward the door with surprising strength. Angel began crying, her tiny wails piercing the night air as Tessa struggled to protect her from Richard's drug-fueled rage. "Please, Richard, please. Just let us stay until morning. I'll leave, I promise I'll leave. But please don't put us out. In this storm. You should have thought of that before you made a whore of yourself," he said, the words clearly Sophia's even as they came from his mouth. He threw open the front door, and Arctic wind howled into the foyer, bringing with it a swirl of snow and ice. "Take nothing," he commanded, his eyes wild and unfocused. "Nothing in this house belongs to you. You came here with nothing, and you'll leave with nothing." Tessa found herself standing in the driveway in nothing but a thin nightgown and slippers, holding her 3-week-old daughter against her chest as the blizzard raged around them. The cold bit through her clothing immediately, and Angel's cries became weaker as the freezing air assaulted her tiny lungs. Behind them, the mansion's doors slammed shut with a finality that echoed through the storm. Tessa could see lights in the windows, could imagine the warmth inside, but she knew that world was lost to her forever. Her car, an old sedan that barely ran in good weather, was parked at the end of the long driveway. By the time she reached it, her feet were numb with cold, and Angel had gone ominously quiet in her arms. With frozen fingers, she managed to get the door open and collapse into the driver's seat, immediately wrapping Angel in her own thin nightgown to try to share what little body heat she had left. The car wouldn't start. Again and again she turned the key, but the engine wouldn't catch in the freezing temperatures. Angel's lips were turning blue, and Tessa realized with growing horror that they were both going to die in this car, in this storm, because of Richard's drug-addled rage and Sophia's calculating evil. But then, by some miracle, the engine caught. The heater barely worked, but it was enough to keep them from freezing as Tessa navigated the empty, snow-covered streets toward the only place she had left to go, a homeless shelter on the other side of town. Back in the mansion, Sophia found Richard in his study, staring at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. The drugs were wearing off enough for him to feel confused about what had just happened, but not enough for him to remember clearly. Did I just do something?" he asked, his voice small and uncertain. "You did what needed to be done, darling," Sophia purred, settling into the chair across from him with a glass of champagne. "You protected yourself from a woman who was using you. I'm so proud of you for being strong." "I feel like I hurt someone," Richard mumbled, rubbing his temples. "But I can't remember. Just the headache from your medication, sweetheart. Here, let me give you something to help you sleep." She handed him another pill, this one designed to wipe the evening's events from his memory entirely. By morning, he would remember nothing except that Tessa had left with another man's child, abandoning him just as Sophia had always predicted she would. "That's my good boy," Sophia whispered, as Richard's eyes fluttered closed. "Mama's here. Mama will always be here." As her son slept fitfully in his chair, Sophia poured herself another glass of champagne and raised it in a toast to the empty room. "To family loyalty," she said, with a satisfied smile, "and to removing obstacles that stand in the way of love." Outside, the storm raged on, burying all traces of Tessa and Angel's flight into the frozen night. But Sophia wasn't worried about them surviving. After all, she had what she wanted most. Her son, alone and dependent, exactly where he belonged. The next morning she would tell the staff that Richard's wife had run away with her lover, taking the illegitimate child with her. Everyone would sympathize with poor Richard, betrayed by the woman he'd tried to help. And if Tessa and the baby died in the storm, well, that would just be one less complication to deal with. Sophia hummed softly to herself as she finished her champagne, already planning the lies she would tell and the evidence she would plant to make Richard's abandonment story absolutely convincing. After all, she had a reputation to protect and an empire to secure. And now, with no distractions, Richard would be completely hers once again, just the way it should be, just the way it had always been meant to be. Mother and son forever. Chapter 4. The Heart-Shattering Discovery. Present day, 7 years later. Richard, Hubble sat in the back of his black Mercedes, staring vacantly out the tinted windows as his driver navigated through the city's poorest district. At 35, he had become everything his mother had molded him to be. A cold, efficient businessman who felt nothing, remembered little, and questioned even less. The pharmaceutical cocktail that Sophia still administered every morning had done its work too well, turning him into a hollow shell of the man he might have been. "Sir, we're approaching the Morrison property," his driver announced, pulling up to a rundown apartment complex that Richard's company was planning to demolish for a new shopping center. Richard nodded absently, his movements mechanical. "Wait. Here, this shouldn't take long." The meeting with the property manager was supposed to be routine, a final walk-through before the demolition crews arrived next week. But as Richard stood in the crumbling courtyard, surrounded by peeling paint and broken dreams, something stirred in the depths of his medicated mind. A feeling he couldn't name, a recognition he couldn't place. He had been here before. Not physically, but emotionally. This desperation, this hopelessness, it reminded him of something buried so deep beneath layers of psychiatric drugs that it barely registered as memory. "The residents have all been relocated," the property manager was saying, but Richard had stopped listening. Across the courtyard, a flash of movement caught his eye, a small figure darting between the buildings, trying to stay hidden. "I need to walk the perimeter alone," Richard heard himself say. "Give me 20 minutes. The property manager looked confused, but didn't argue with the man who was paying his salary. "Of course, sir. I'll be in the office if you need anything." Richard found himself walking toward the movement he'd seen, his expensive Italian shoes crunching on broken glass and discarded dreams. The Xanax and mood stabilizers that usually kept his emotions in check seemed to be wearing off ahead of schedule, leaving him feeling strangely alert and unsettled. He rounded the corner of the building and stopped dead in his tracks. There, sitting on the concrete steps of a basement apartment, was a little girl who couldn't have been more than 7 years old. She was small for her age, with delicate features and skin the color of warm honey. Her clothes were clean but obviously second-hand, and her tiny hands were raw and bloody from scrubbing. The child was hunched over a bucket of soapy water, tears streaming down her face as she tried to clean what looked like her own blood from the concrete steps. The scrub brush in her hands was almost as big as her torso, and every movement clearly caused her pain. Richard felt something crack in his chest, not the clean break of a bone, but the slow, devastating fracture of ice beginning to thaw under overwhelming warmth. "Hey," he called out softly, not wanting to frighten her. "Are you okay?" The little girl looked up, and Richard's world tilted on its axis. She had his eyes, the same unusual shade of green that he saw in the mirror every morning, the same long lashes that his mother had always called his prettiest feature, but it was more than just the eyes, the shape of her face, the stubborn set of her jaw, even the way she held her head. She was like looking at a photograph of himself as a child. If that photograph had been painted in shades of bronze and gold instead of pale ivory. "I'm okay, mister," she said in a voice that was far too mature for her age. "I just gotta get this clean before Grandmama Carmen gets home, or she'll be real mad." Richard's legs felt unsteady as he approached her. "What happened to your hands?" "Sweetheart," the little girl, his daughter, some buried part of his mind whispered, looked down at her bleeding palms with resignation that no child should ever possess. "The brush is rough, but Grandmama says I gotta use it or the steps won't get clean. She says lazy girls don't deserve dinner." "How old are you?" Richard asked, though he already knew the answer would destroy him. 7, she said, wiping her nose with the back of her wrist. "Well, 7 and 3 months and 2 days. Mama says I'm real good at math. 7 years. 7 years since he'd thrown a young mother and her newborn baby out into a blizzard. 7 years since Sophia had convinced Him that the child wasn't his, that Tessa had betrayed him with another man. 7 years of living with the ghost of what he'd done, buried beneath layers of medication and lies. "Where is your mama?" Richard asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's at work. She works real hard. 3 jobs so we can have food and pay Grandmama Carmen for letting us live here." The little girl's voice dropped to a whisper. "Mama cries sometimes when she thinks I'm sleeping. I think it's 'cause she's tired." Richard knelt down beside her, and up close he could see even more of himself in her features, the way her eyebrows drew together when she was thinking, the small scar on her chin that matched one he'd gotten at the same age, the intelligent light in her eyes that no amount of hardship had been able to dim. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Angel," she said, and Richard felt what was left of his heart shatter completely. "Mama says she named me that 'cause I was her miracle when everything was dark." Angel. His daughter's name was Angel, and she was sitting here bleeding and crying because of choices he'd made while poisoned by his mother's drugs and lies. The irony was so cruel, it took his breath away. "Angel," he repeated, tasting the name like a prayer. "That's a beautiful name." She smiled then, and it was like watching the sun rise after the longest night of his life. "Thank you, mister, you're real nice. Most people don't talk to me." "Why are you crying, Angel?" Richard asked, though he was afraid he already knew the answer. Angel's smile faded, and fresh tears began to flow down her cheeks. "I was thinking about my daddy," she whispered. "Mama says he had to go away before I was born, but sometimes I pretend he might come back someday." Richard's chest felt like it was caving in. "What do you think about your daddy?" "Mama says he was handsome and sad, and that he loved us, but got confused by mean people." Angel wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "I think maybe if I'm real good and help Mama enough, he might come find us. But Grandmama Carmen says he don't want us 'cause we're not good enough." The words hit Richard like physical blows. This innocent child, his daughter, had spent 7 years believing that her father had abandoned her because she wasn't good enough. While he'd been living in luxury, numbed by drugs and surrounded by lies, his baby girl had been scrubbing floors, with bleeding hands and dreaming of a father who might love her someday. "Angel," Richard said, his voice breaking, "what if I told you that your daddy didn't want to leave? What if he was sick and mean people lied to him and made him do something terrible?" Angel tilted her head, studying his face with those eyes that were so achingly familiar. "Are you talking about my daddy, mister?" Richard couldn't speak. He couldn't tell her the truth. Not here, not like this. Not when he didn't even know if he was strong enough to break free from his mother's control. But he couldn't lie to her either, not when she was looking at him with such hope and trust. "I think," he said carefully, "that any man who had a little girl like you would be the luckiest daddy in the world." Angel smiled again, that heartbreaking sunrise smile. "Mama says that too. She says maybe someday he'll remember how much he loves us." "I'm sure he already remembers," Richard whispered, tears he hadn't shed in years beginning to fall down his face. "I'm sure he never really forgot." They sat in silence for a moment, this broken man and the daughter he'd thrown away, both of them crying for different reasons, but sharing the same pain. Angel reached out with one small bloody hand and patted Richard's knee. "Don't be sad, mister," she said, with the wisdom of a child who had comforted her mother through 7 years of heartbreak. "Mama says that love always finds a way, even when everything seems impossible." Richard looked at this tiny miracle, this perfect little person who had somehow survived poverty and neglect and still had enough kindness left to comfort a stranger. She was everything good that he had destroyed, everything pure that his mother had tried to corrupt, everything hopeful that his family had tried to crush. "Angel," he said, his voice stronger now as something awakened in him that 7 years of drugs hadn't been able to kill. What if I told you that someone was going to make sure you and your mama never had to worry about being safe or having enough to eat ever again?" "I'd say that sounds like a fairy tale," Angel replied with a sad little laugh. "But Mama reads me fairy tales sometimes, and she says even if they're not real, they're still important because they help us remember what to hope for." Richard stood up, his mind clearer than it had been in years. The pharmaceutical fog that usually clouded his thoughts was lifting, burned away by the intensity of what he was feeling. For the first time since he was 15 years old, he was thinking without his mother's chemical interference. "Angel, I need you to do something very important for me," he said. "I need you to go inside and tell your mama that someone is coming to help. Someone who's going to make sure you never have to scrub floors with bleeding hands again." "Really?" Angel's eyes lit up with cautious hope. "You promise?" "I promise," Richard said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. "And Angel, I need you to remember something very important. You are good enough. You have always been good enough. Any daddy would be proud to have a brave, smart, beautiful little girl like you." Angel threw her arms around Richard's legs in a spontaneous hug that nearly brought him to his knees. "You're the nicest man I ever met, mister. I hope you find whatever you're looking for too." As Richard held his daughter, really held her for the first time in her life, he knew exactly what he was looking for. He was looking for the strength to break free from his mother's poison, the courage to face what he'd done, the wisdom to protect this innocent child from any more harm, and the power to destroy anyone who had hurt his family. "I love you, Angel," he whispered into her hair, words he should have said 7 years ago. "More than you'll ever know." He didn't know if she understood the significance of his words, but she hugged him tighter. "I love you too, nice mister. Will you come back and see me?" "Wild horses couldn't keep me away," Richard promised. And for the first time in 7 years, he meant every word he said. As he walked back to his car, Richard Hubble was no longer the hollow shell his mother had created. The man who had thrown his wife and baby into a blizzard was gone, replaced by someone who would move heaven and earth to protect the little girl who had just called him nice mister and believed in fairy tales. Sophia had made one crucial mistake. In all her careful planning, she had assumed that love, once destroyed, could never grow back. She was about to learn how wrong she was. Chapter 5. The Awakening Father. 2 weeks after the discovery. Richard sat in his car across from Angel's elementary school, watching through tinted windows as children poured out of the building like colorful confetti. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had turned white, and for the first time in 7 years he had skipped his morning vitamins, the cocktail of psychiatric drugs that Sophia administered every day to keep him compliant. The withdrawal was brutal. His head pounded, his hands shook, and waves of nausea rolled through him every few minutes. But underneath the physical discomfort, something remarkable was happening. He was thinking clearly. For the first time since he was 15 years old, his thoughts were his own, and what he was thinking was making him sick for entirely different reasons. There she was, Angel, walking slowly down the school steps with a backpack that looked too heavy for her small frame. Even from a distance, Richard could see that she was alone. While other children ran to waiting parents or climbed onto buses with friends, his daughter stood by herself, scanning the crowd hopefully before her shoulders sagged in disappointment. Richard's heart clenched as he watched Angel begin the long walk home, her tiny figure dwarfed by the urban landscape around her. She stopped at every crosswalk, looked both ways carefully, and kept her head down as she navigated through neighborhoods that no 7-year-old should have to travel alone. He followed at a distance, staying far enough back to avoid being seen. but close enough to intervene if she encountered danger. What he saw during that 20-minute journey broke his heart piece by piece. Angel stopped at a corner grocery store and carefully counted coins from a small purse, buying a single apple and a packet of crackers. She offered half the apple to a stray dog that followed her for 2 blocks. She helped an elderly man pick up groceries he'd dropped, even though it made her late. She waved at every person she passed, even though most ignored her completely. This was his daughter, kind, careful, compassionate, despite the hardships she faced, and he had thrown her away like garbage because of his mother's lies. That evening, Richard stood outside the rundown apartment building where Angel lived with Tessa, and the woman she called Grandmama Carmen. The place was a testament to urban decay. Broken windows patched with cardboard, graffiti covering every available surface, and the lingering smell of desperation that clung to places where hope went to die. Through a basement window, he could see into what must be their apartment. The space was tiny, barely larger than his walk-in closet, but it was clean and filled with small touches that spoke of love despite poverty. Children's drawings decorated the walls, a few battered books sat on a makeshift shelf made from milk crates, and a small table held what looked like homework materials. And there was Tessa. Richard's breath caught in his throat as he saw his ex-wife. For the first time in 7 years, she was thinner than he remembered, her face showing the wear of constant stress and exhaustion. Her beautiful dark skin had a grey undertone that spoke of malnutrition and overwork, and her hands, once soft and delicate, were now rough and scarred from years of manual labor. But she was still beautiful, even worn down by hardship, even exhausted from fighting battles that should never have been hers to fight. Tessa Ray still took his breath away. She was helping Angel with homework at the tiny table, their heads bent together over what looked like a math worksheet. Richard could see Tessa's lips moving as she explained something, and Angel's face lit up with understanding. The love between them was palpable, even from his hiding place outside their window. "Mama, I met a nice man today," Angel was saying, her voice carrying through the thin glass. "He was real sad, but he was kind to me." Tessa's head snapped up, sudden fear in her eyes. "Angel, what have I told you about talking to strangers?" "But he wasn't a bad stranger, Mama. He was worried about my hands when I was cleaning the steps, and he told me that any daddy would be lucky to have a little girl like me." Richard watched as Tessa's face went through a complex series of emotions: fear, pain, hope, and something that might have been longing. "What did this man look like, baby?" He had green eyes like mine, and he was tall and handsome, but mostly he just looked really, really sad. Angel paused in her coloring. "Mama, do you think my daddy is sad too? Do you think he misses us?" The question hit Richard like a physical blow. Through the window, he could see tears streaming down Tessa's face as she pulled Angel into her arms. "I think," Tessa said carefully, her voice thick with emotion, "that if your daddy knew what an amazing little girl you are, he would love you more than all the stars in the sky." "Then why doesn't he come see us?" Tessa was quiet for a long moment, and Richard could see her struggling with how to answer. Finally, she said, "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, baby. Sometimes they get confused by bad people who tell them lies. But that doesn't mean the love isn't there. Do you still love my daddy, Mama?" Another long pause. "I love the man I thought he was," Tessa whispered, "and I hope that man is still in there somewhere fighting to come back to us." Richard pressed his hand to the window, tears streaming down his face. She was still defending him. After everything he'd done, after throwing her and their newborn daughter into a blizzard, after 7 years of absence and silence, Tessa was still telling their daughter that love could overcome anything. He didn't deserve it. He didn't deserve her forgiveness or Angel's hope or the chance to be part of their lives. But he was going to fight for it anyway, because they deserved better than the life they'd been forced to live because of his failures. The next morning, Richard made the first of many anonymous deliveries. A bag of groceries appeared on Tessa's doorstep with no note, no signature, just nutritious food and a few small luxuries that no one in their building could afford. He watched from his car as Tessa found the bag, looked around in confusion, then brought it inside with tears in her eyes. The following week, Angel's school fees were mysteriously paid in full, along with money for new school supplies and a warm winter coat. Richard hired a private investigator to look into Carmen's activities and discovered that the woman was running a small-time drug operation out of the basement apartment, using Angel as an unwitting courier when she sent the child on errands around the neighborhood. The rage that discovery unleashed in Richard was unlike anything he'd ever felt. The thought of his innocent daughter being exposed to drugs, of being used as a pawn in Carmen's criminal enterprise, made him want to tear the world apart with his bare hands. But he couldn't act rashly, not yet. First, he needed to understand the full scope of what had been done to his family. He needed evidence, allies, and a plan that would ensure Tessa and Angel's safety when he finally made his move. He hired 3 different private investigators to dig into his own past, to find proof of Sophia's manipulations and lies. What they uncovered made his blood run cold. The DNA tests that had proven Angel wasn't his daughter. Fabricated, paid for with $50,000 from one of Sophia's secret accounts. The psychiatric medications he'd been taking since he was 15, a dangerous cocktail of antipsychotics and mood stabilizers that had essentially turned him into a zombie, administered without his knowledge or consent. The breakdown he'd supposedly had at 16 that landed him in a psychiatric ward. Orchestrated by Sophia when he tried to escape her control and go to college on the other coast. Richard discovered that he'd been a prisoner his entire adult life, controlled by a woman who claimed to love him but had systematically destroyed every chance he'd ever had at real happiness. She had murdered his father, stolen his inheritance, poisoned his mind, and manipulated him into destroying his own family. The Richard who had thrown Tessa and Angel into the snow hadn't really been him at all. It had been Sophia's puppet, dancing to her twisted tune. "Where have you been, darling?" Sophia's voice was sharp with suspicion as Richard entered the mansion after another day of surveillance. "You missed your morning vitamins, and you were gone all day without telling me where you were going." Richard looked at his mother, really looked at her for the first time in years. Without the chemical fog clouding his vision, he could see what she really was, a beautiful monster who had spent decades perfecting the art of psychological torture. "I had some business to take care of," he said carefully, not yet ready to tip his hand. "Business?" Sophia moved closer, her predator's instincts clearly aroused. "What kind of business requires you to skip your medication and disappear for hours at a time?" "The kind that's none of your concern," Richard replied, his voice odder than it had been in years. Sophia's eyes flashed dangerously. "Everything you do is my concern, Richard. I'm your mother. I've sacrificed everything to protect you, to make you strong, to keep you safe from people who would use you and hurt you." "People like Tessa?" The name hung in the air between them, like a loaded gun. Sophia's face went very still, her mask of maternal concern slipping just enough to reveal the monster underneath. "We don't speak that name in this house," she said, her voice deadly quiet. "That woman nearly destroyed you. I saved you from her lies and manipulations, and I'll be damned if I let you forget the lessons we learned." "What if I told you that I remember things differently now?" Richard asked, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "What if I told you that I've been having dreams about a little girl with green eyes who cries while she cleans floors with bleeding hands?" Sophia's face went pale. "You're having side effects from missing your medication." These false memories will fade once you get back on your proper dosage. What if they're not false memories, Mother? What if they're the truth trying to break through years of chemical suppression? You're being ridiculous, Sophia snapped, but Richard could see fear in her eyes for the first time in his life. That child wasn't yours, Richard. The DNA tests proved it. She was the product of that whore's infidelity, and you were right to throw them both out. Show me the tests, Richard demanded. What? The DNA tests. Show them to me, right now. Sophia's composure cracked completely. I don't have to show you anything. I'm your mother. You trust me, remember? You've always trusted me. Maybe it's time I stopped, Richard said quietly, and for the first time in his life, he walked away from his mother while she was still talking. Behind him, he could hear Sophia screaming his name. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. He had a daughter to save, a wife to apologize to, and a life to reclaim from the woman who had stolen it all. The war between Richard and Sophia had begun, and only one of them would be left standing when it was over. But first, he had to find the courage to face the two people he'd hurt most in the world and beg for a forgiveness he wasn't sure he deserved. The little girl who had hugged his legs and called him "nice mister" deserved to know that her daddy had finally come home. Chapter 6. The legal battle begins. 1 month after the discovery. The law offices of Sterling, Blackwood and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of the city's most prestigious downtown tower. At 7 in the morning, most of the building was empty, but Richard Hubble sat in the senior partner's office, surrounded by evidence that would destroy his mother's carefully constructed web of lies. James Sterling, the city's most feared family, law attorney, spread the documents across his mahogany desk like a general planning a war. The DNA lab records, financial statements, medical records, and witness testimonies painted a picture of systematic manipulation and abuse that made even the veteran lawyer's hands shake with rage. This is the most comprehensive case of psychological and financial abuse I've seen in 30 years of practice, Sterling said, his voice grim. Your mother essentially imprisoned you in your own mind, Mr. Hubble. What she did to you, and by extension to your wife and daughter, constitutes multiple felonies. Richard stared at the fabricated DNA results that had destroyed his family, his jaw clenched so tightly that his teeth ached. How soon can we move? I've already filed the preliminary motions. Emergency custody hearing is scheduled for Friday. But Mr. Hubble, Sterling leaned forward, his expression serious. You need to understand what you're up against. Your mother has connections throughout the legal system. Judges she's donated to, prosecutors she's had to dinner, police commissioners who owe her favors. This won't be a fair fight. I don't care about fair, Richard said, his voice deadly quiet. I care about justice. I care about protecting my daughter from the monster who's been controlling my life. Whatever it costs, whatever it takes, I want my family back. Sterling nodded approvingly. Then we go to war. The emergency custody hearing was held in family court downtown, a sterile building that had witnessed countless family tragedies, but rarely one as complex as the Hubble case. Richard sat at the plaintiff's table, clean-shaven and clear-eyed for the first time in years, while his team of lawyers arranged their arsenal of evidence. Across the courtroom, Tessa Ray sat with her court-appointed attorney, her face a mask of confused shock. She wore her only good dress, a simple black outfit that she'd bought for job interviews, and kept glancing toward the door, as if looking for an escape route. When Richard had first tried to approach her outside the courthouse, she'd actually run from him, terror written across her beautiful face. It had taken his lawyers and a court bailiff to convince her that she was safe, that this wasn't some elaborate trap designed to take Angel away from her. All rise, the bailiff called out. The Honorable Judge Margaret Chen presiding. Judge. Chen was a small, fierce woman in her 60s, with a reputation for seeing through legal manipulation. She took her seat and surveyed the courtroom with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "This is an emergency hearing regarding custody of the minor child Angel Ray," she began, consulting her files. "Mr. Hubble, you're claiming paternal rights to a child you allegedly abandoned 7 years ago. This is highly unusual. Counselor, Sterling, make your case." Sterling rose, his commanding presence filling the courtroom. "Your Honor, my client didn't abandon his daughter. He was the victim of an elaborate scheme orchestrated by his mother, Sophia Hubble, to destroy his marriage and separate him from his child." A murmur ran through the courtroom as Sterling began presenting evidence. The fake DNA results, the bank records showing the $50,000 payment to falsify them, the medical records documenting Richard's involuntary psychiatric medication, and witness statements from former Hubble estate employees who had seen Sophia's cruelty firsthand. Mr. Hubble was systematically drugged with psychiatric medications from the age of 15, Sterling continued. These drugs, administered without his knowledge or consent, impaired his judgment, memory, and ability to make rational decisions. The night he allegedly abandoned his family, he was under the influence of a massive overdose of antipsychotics and mood stabilizers. Judge Chen's eyebrows rose higher with each piece of evidence. "Are you telling me that Mr. Hubble was essentially drugged into throwing out his wife and newborn child?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you, Your Honor, and we have the medical evidence to prove it." Tessa's attorney, a young public defender named Maria Santos, stood up shakily. "Your Honor, even if these allegations are true, my client and her daughter have been abandoned for 7 years. The child doesn't know her father. This sudden reappearance could be traumatic." "If I may interrupt," Sterling said smoothly, "we also have evidence that Mr. Hubble has been trying to reconnect with his daughter. Anonymous grocery deliveries, paid school fees, medical expenses, all traced back to accounts controlled by my client." Tessa's head snapped up, her eyes widening as she stared at Richard. "That was you?" she whispered. Richard met her gaze for the first time since the hearing began. "I've been watching over you both," he said quietly. "I know it doesn't make up for what I did, but I never stopped." "Mr. Hubble," Judge Chen interrupted, "save your statements for testimony. I want to hear from the child's mother." Tessa stood on shaking legs, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Your Honor, I don't understand what's happening. 7 years ago, Richard threw me and our newborn daughter out of his house in the middle of a blizzard. We nearly died. And now he's here claiming he was drugged? That his mother made him do it." Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, 7 years of pain and anger fueling her words. "Even if that's true, where has he been? Where was he when Angel was learning to walk, when she had pneumonia and I had to sell my body to pay for her medicine? Where was he when she cried herself to sleep asking why her daddy didn't love her?" The courtroom fell silent. Richard's face had gone white, and even Sterling looked shaken by the raw pain in Tessa's voice. "Ms. Ray," Judge Chen said gently, "I understand your anger, but if Mr. Hubble was indeed a victim of systematic abuse and drugging, then what about us?" Tessa demanded, tears streaming down her face. "What about Angel, who spent 7 years thinking she wasn't good enough for her father to love? What about me, who's worked 3 jobs and lived in hell because the man who was supposed to protect us threw us away like garbage?" Richard stood up abruptly, ignoring his lawyer's restraining hand. "You're right," he said, his voice breaking. "You're absolutely right, and I'm sorry. I'm so fucking sorry, Tessa. I know I can't take back what I did. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But please, please don't punish Angel because of my failures." "Mr. Hubble, sit down," Judge Chen ordered, but Richard ignored her. "I've been clean from the drugs for a month now," he continued, his eyes never leaving Tessa's face. "For the first time in 20 years, I can think clearly. And what I think is that I destroyed the most beautiful thing in my life because I was too weak to fight my mother's poison. But I'm fighting now, Tessa. I'm fighting for Angel, and I'm fighting for you, and I'm fighting to be the man I should have been 7 years ago. Mr. Hubble, I will hold you in contempt if you don't let him speak, Tessa said suddenly, her voice barely audible. Please, Your Honor, let him speak. Richard took a shaky breath. I know I have no right to ask for anything from you, but Angel is innocent in all this. She deserves to know her father, to have every advantage I can give her. She deserves to never scrub floors with bleeding hands again, to never worry about having enough food, to never doubt that she's loved completely and unconditionally. How do I know you won't change your mind again? Tessa asked, her voice raw with vulnerability. How do I know that your mother won't find another way to control you, to turn you against us? Richard's jaw tightened. Because I'm going to destroy her before she gets the chance. The courtroom erupted as the doors burst open and Sophia Hubble swept in like an avenging angel in designer clothes. She was accompanied by 3 of the city's most expensive lawyers and a small army of private security. Your Honor, I object to these proceedings, she announced before anyone could speak. My son is clearly having another psychotic episode. He's off his medication and making wild accusations. Mrs. Hubble, Judge Chen said sternly, you have no standing in this courtroom. This is a custody hearing between... I have every standing, Sophia snapped, her mask of refinement slipping completely. Richard is my son, and he's mentally ill. He's been on psychiatric medication for years, because he's dangerous when he's not properly medicated. Sterling was on his feet immediately. Your Honor, this is exactly the kind of manipulation we've been documenting. Mrs. Hubble has been illegally medicating her adult son for 20 years to maintain control over him. Richard, baby, Sophia said, ignoring the lawyers and focusing on her son. Look at what you're doing. Look at how you're embarrassing our family. These people don't love you. They just want your money. Come home with Mama. Let me take care of you like I always have. Richard stood slowly, and for a moment everyone in the courtroom held their breath. Then he spoke, his voice clear and strong. You're not my mother, he said quietly. Mothers don't drug their children. Mothers don't murder their husbands. Mothers don't destroy their son's chance at happiness because they're too selfish to let him go. Sophia's face went white. With rage. How dare you? I dare because I finally remember who I was before you broke me, Richard continued. I remember the man who wanted to love his wife and daughter, the man you destroyed with your lies and your poison and your sick need to control everything around you. Without me, you're nothing, Sophia screamed, her composure completely shattered. I made you everything you are. I protected you from that whore and her bastard child. The courtroom fell silent. Even Sophia's lawyers looked horrified by their client's outburst. Judge Chen's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Mrs. Hubble, you will remove yourself from my courtroom immediately, or I will have you arrested for contempt. As security moved to escort Sophia out, she turned to Richard one last time. If you choose them over me, she hissed, I'll make sure you lose everything. Every penny, every business deal, every connection you have. I'll destroy you, Richard. I'll destroy you and that little bastard and her whore mother. Mrs. Hubble, Judge Chen said icily, you have just threatened a minor child in open court. And bailiff, arrest this woman immediately. As Sophia was led away in handcuffs, still screaming threats and profanities, Richard turned to Tessa. She was staring at him with a mixture of fear, hope, and something that might have been recognition. I don't know if I can trust you, she whispered. I don't know if I can survive being hurt by you again. Then don't trust me, Richard said simply. Trust the courts, trust the lawyers, trust the evidence. But please, Tessa, trust that Angel. Deserves to know her father loves her. Judge Chen banged her gavel. In light of the evidence presented and the defendant's behavior in this courtroom, I'm granting temporary supervised visitation rights to Mr. Hubble, with full custody evaluation to follow. Ms. Ray, I'm also ordering immediate protective services for you and your daughter and emergency financial support to ensure your safety and well-being. As the courtroom began to empty, Richard approached Tessa cautiously. I know this is overwhelming, he said quietly. I know you have every reason to hate me, but thank you for giving me this chance. Tessa looked at him for a long moment, studying his face as if seeing him for the first time. Angel asked me last week if I thought her daddy was sad, she said finally. I told her that if he knew what an amazing daughter he had, he would love her more than all the stars in the sky. I do, Richard whispered. I love her more than my own life, and I love you, Tessa. I never stopped loving you, even when I couldn't remember why. Tessa's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't move away when Richard reached out to touch her face gently. Then prove it, she said simply. Not with words or money or lawyers. Prove it by being the man Angel dreams about when she talks to your picture every night. Richard's heart stopped. She has my picture? She's had it since she was 3, Tessa said softly. She talks to it every night, telling you about her day and asking when you're coming home. She paused, her voice breaking. I guess now she'll finally get her answer. As they left the courthouse together, not as a reunited family, but as two broken people trying to heal the wounds that had kept them apart, Richard made a silent promise to the daughter he had abandoned and the woman he had betrayed. He would prove himself worthy of their love or die trying, and somewhere in a jail cell across town, Sophia Hubble was already plotting her revenge. Chapter 7. Tessa's Brilliant Revenge. 2 months after the custody hearing. The law offices of Ray and Associates occupied a modest but respectable building in the city's legal district, a far cry from the opulent towers where Richard conducted his business. But what the office lacked in marble and gold, it more than made up for in purpose and passion. This was where justice came to those who couldn't afford the luxury firms, where the forgotten and abandoned found their voices. And at the center of it all sat Tessa Ray, no longer the broken 19-year-old who had been sold into marriage, but a formidable woman who had transformed 7 years of suffering into an arsenal of legal expertise and righteous fury. Richard stood in her reception area, clutching a bouquet of white roses, Angel's favorite flowers, and trying to work up the courage to face the woman he'd destroyed. 2 months of supervised visitations had shown him glimpses of who Tessa had become. But this was the first time she'd agreed to meet with him privately since the custody hearing. Ms. Ray will see you now, the receptionist said, her voice professionally cold. Everyone in the office knew Richard's story, and their loyalty to their boss was absolute and unforgiving. Tessa's office was nothing like the sterile corporate spaces Richard was used to. The walls were covered with photographs of successful cases, families reunited, children protected, justice served. Awards and certifications hung beside Angel's artwork, and law books shared shelf space with fairy tale collections that mother and daughter read together. You can put those down, Tessa said, without looking up from the case file she was reviewing. Angel is allergic to roses, has been since she was 3. But you wouldn't know that, would you? The words hit Richard like physical blows. Even in his attempts to show love, he was failing his daughter because he didn't know the most basic things about her. He set the flowers on the side table and took the seat across from Tessa's desk, waiting for her to acknowledge him. When she finally looked up, Richard's breath caught. Gone was the frightened girl who had scrubbed floors with bleeding hands. The woman sitting across from him radiated power and confidence, her dark eyes sharp with intelligence and something far more dangerous, the cold fury of someone who had been underestimated for far too long. "You wanted to talk," she said simply. "Talk!" "I want to apologize," Richard began, his prepared speech suddenly feeling inadequate. "I want to explain—" "Explain what?" Tessa interrupted, leaning back in her chair. "Explain how you threw your pregnant wife and newborn daughter into a blizzard. Explain how you believed your psychotic mother over the woman who loved you. Explain how you lived in luxury for 7 years while your child scraped her hands bloody, trying to survive." Each word was delivered with surgical precision, designed to cut deep and leave scars. Richard absorbed them all, knowing he deserved worse. "I was drugged," he said quietly. "For 20 years, Sophia was— I know exactly what Sophia was doing." Tessa cut him off again. "I've had 7 years to research every aspect of your family's crimes, 7 years to plan, to prepare, to position myself for this moment." Richard's confusion must have shown on his face, because Tessa's smile was sharp as a blade. "Did you really think I spent 7 years just surviving, Richard? Did you think I was content to clean houses and wait tables while my daughter grew up believing her father didn't love her?" She stood and moved to the window, her silhouette commanding against the city skyline. "I told you once that love finds a way. What I didn't tell you is that sometimes love finds a way through revenge." "I don't understand." Tessa turned back to him, and for the first time since he'd entered her office, she looked genuinely amused. "Of course you don't. You still see me as the helpless girl you married, the victim you abandoned. But Richard, I stopped being a victim the night you threw us out. That night, holding my dying baby in a freezing car, I made myself a promise. I would become strong enough to protect Angel from anyone who tried to hurt her, including you." She returned to her desk and opened a thick file folder, spreading documents. Across the surface, like a general displaying battle plans. "Do you recognize these?" she asked, pointing to a stack of contracts and business proposals. Richard leaned forward, his eyes widening as he saw his own signature on documents he barely remembered signing. "These are from our marriage. Business deals I was working on. When you were too drugged to read the fine print," Tessa finished. "When you signed whatever your loving wife put in front of you because you trusted her to handle the details while you struggled with your mother's poison." The pieces began falling into place, and Richard felt the color drain from his face. "Tessa, what did you do?" "I did what any smart woman would do when married to a man whose mother was slowly destroying him," she said calmly. "I protected our interests. Every major contract you signed during our marriage, every business partnership, every real estate deal, I made sure there were clauses protecting the interests of your wife and any children born during the marriage." Richard stared at the documents, his mind racing. "But these deals, they're worth millions. They're the foundation of my entire business empire." "Exactly." Tessa's smile was cold as Arctic winter. 40% of Hubble Industries legally belongs to me, Richard, and by extension to Angel. The shopping centers, the real estate developments, the tech investments. I own nearly half of everything you think is exclusively yours." The silence in the room was deafening. Richard felt like he was drowning, gasping for air as the implications of what Tessa was telling him sank in. "You could have claimed it years ago," he whispered. "You could have taken everything." "I could have," Tessa agreed. "But I needed you weak, distracted, and completely under your mother's control. I needed Sophia to feel safe and superior while I built my own empire in the shadows." She moved to another filing cabinet and pulled out more documents. Business, licenses, corporate filings, tax records. Ray and Associates isn't just a law firm, Richard. It's the tip of the iceberg. Over the past 7 years, I've built a network of businesses, investments, and partnerships that spans 3 states. I've helped other women like me, women whose husbands abandoned them, whose families threw them away, whose children needed protection from systems designed to fail them. Richard's head was spinning. How? How did you do all this while working? 3 jobs and taking care of Angel? The same way your mother built her web of control, Tessa said simply. Patience, planning, and an absolute refusal to give up. The difference is, I built my empire to protect people, not destroy them. She sat back down, her eyes never leaving his face. Every grocery delivery you sent, every school fee you paid, every medical bill you covered, I tracked it all back to you. I've been watching you watch us, Richard. I've seen you sitting in your car outside Angel's school, following her home, learning her routines. You knew. I've known everything from the beginning. The private investigators you hired to research. Your own past? 2 of them work for me. The evidence that convicted your mother, half of it came from files I've been building for 7 years. Richard felt like the ground was shifting beneath his feet. Why? Why help me at all if you hate me? So much? Tessa was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was softer than it had been since he arrived. Because Angel deserves to know her father, she said simply. Because despite everything you did to us, despite the years of pain and struggle and wondering if we would survive another day, I still believed that somewhere inside the man who threw us away was the man I fell in love with, Tessa. But loving someone and trusting someone are 2 very different things, she continued, her voice hardening again. I may have helped orchestrate your mother's downfall, but that doesn't mean I've forgiven you. It doesn't mean I trust you with Angel's heart or mine. She stood and moved to a safe in the corner of her office, returning with a thick legal document. This is a contract, she said, placing it in front of him. It outlines the terms under which you will be allowed to build a relationship with Angel, supervised visits, therapy sessions, background checks, financial transparency, everything designed to protect our daughter from being hurt again. Richard picked up the contract, his hands shaking as he read the terms. They were strict, unforgiving, and completely reasonable given what he had done. And if I refuse, he asked, then you walk away from Angel's life forever, and I use my 40% ownership of your company to destroy everything Sophia helped you build, Tessa said, without hesitation. I'll donate every penny to organizations that help abandoned children and abused women. Your mother's legacy will be wiped from the earth, and Angel will grow up knowing that her father chose his pride over her love. Richard set the contract down and looked at the woman who had outmaneuvered him completely. You really have thought of everything. I've had 7 years to think, Richard. 7 years of watching our daughter cry herself to sleep. 7 years of working myself to exhaustion. 7 years of being strong when all I wanted to do was break down and die from the pain of losing you. For the first time since he'd entered her office, Tessa's composure cracked slightly, and Richard saw a glimpse of the heartbroken girl she had been. I loved you, she whispered. God help me, I loved you so much that I would have died for you, and you threw that love away because your mother told you to. I know, Richard said, his own voice breaking. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so fucking sorry, Tessa. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve Angel's love. And I sure as hell don't deserve a second chance. But I'm asking for one anyway because the alternative is living the rest of my life knowing I failed the 2 most important people in the world. Tessa wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders, the powerful attorney once again replacing the vulnerable woman. Then sign the contract, she said. Prove that you've changed. Prove that you can put Angel's needs before your own pride. Before your mother's poison, before everything else in your life. Richard picked up the pen without hesitation. What happens after I sign this? Then we see if the man I loved is still in there somewhere, Tessa said quietly. We see if Richard Hubble can be the father Angel deserves instead of the monster Sophia created. As Richard signed his name to the contract that would govern his relationship with his daughter, he realized that Tessa's revenge was more devastating than anything Sophia could have devised. She hadn't just taken his money or his business. She had forced him to confront exactly what kind of man he had become and what kind of man he needed to be. "One more thing," Tessa said as he handed her the signed contract. "Angel doesn't know about any of this, about my business empire, about the ownership stakes, about the years of planning. As far as she knows, I'm just her mama who works hard to take care of her. Why? Because she needs to love you for who you are, not fear you for what you own. And if you ever try to use your wealth or power to manipulate her, if you ever make her feel like she owes you anything for the privilege of having a father," Tessa's eyes blazed with protective fury, "then you'll discover that revenge is a dish best served by someone who has absolutely nothing left to lose." Richard nodded, understanding completely. He was no longer dealing with the naive girl he had married. He was dealing with a woman who had weaponized her pain and turned it into power, a woman who would burn down the world to keep her daughter safe. And despite everything, he had never loved her more. Chapter 8. The Price of Redemption. 6 months after the contract, the playground at Riverside Elementary was Angel's favorite place in the world, where she could swing high enough to touch the clouds and pretend for just a few moments that she was flying away from all the complicated adult emotions that seemed to follow her everywhere lately. Richard sat on a bench 30 feet away, close enough to keep her safe, but far enough to respect the boundaries that Tessa's contract had established. This was their third supervised visit this week, and while the court-appointed supervisor had finally relaxed enough to read her book instead of watching his every move, Richard still felt like he was walking on eggshells around his own daughter. "Daddy, watch this!" Angel called out, pumping her legs to make the swing go higher. The word "daddy" still hit Richard like lightning every time she said it. 3 months of supervised visits, family therapy sessions, and careful relationship building had led to this miracle, his daughter calling him by the name he'd dreamed of hearing for 7 years. "That's amazing, sweetheart," he called back, his heart swelling with pride and terror in equal measure. "Be careful!" Angel jumped from the swing at the peak of its arc, landing with the fearless grace that only children possess. She ran to Richard, her face glowing with excitement and something that looked like love. "Did you see how far I jumped? I bet I went like 10 feet. "At least 10 feet, Richard agreed, pulling out his phone. "Want me to take a picture to show Mama?" Angel's face clouded slightly at the mention of Tessa, and Richard felt the familiar stab of guilt that accompanied any reminder of the tension between her parents. "Mama's been sad lately," Angel said, settling onto the bench beside him. "She tries to hide it, but I can tell. She gets that crinkle between her eyebrows when she's thinking too hard about grown-up stuff." Richard's chest tightened. Despite the professional success of their legal arrangement, despite the supervised visits going well, despite Angel slowly learning to trust him, Tessa remained as distant as ever. She was polite during custody exchanges, professional during family therapy sessions, and completely unreachable when it came to anything resembling forgiveness. "Your mama has a lot to think about," Richard said carefully. "This is all new for everyone." "Are you and Mama gonna get married again?" Angel asked, with the directness that only children could manage. The question caught Richard off guard. "Angel, that's complicated." "That's what grown-ups always say when they don't want to tell the truth," Angel observed. "I'm 8 now, Daddy. I understand more than you think I do." Richard looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and realized she was right. The past 6 months had changed her from a timid 7-year-old into a confident young girl who asked hard questions and deserved honest answers. "Your mama and I hurt each other very badly," he said slowly. "Sometimes when people hurt each other, even if they're sorry, it takes a very long time to heal. Like when I broke my arm and it took forever to stop hurting. Exactly like that. Except hearts take even longer to heal than bones." Angel considered this seriously, But you still love each other, right? I can tell by the way you look at her when she's not watching. Richard's breath caught. What do you mean? You get the same sad, happy face that Mama gets when she looks at your picture, Angel said matter-of-factly. The one she keeps hidden in her jewelry box but thinks I don't know about. The revelation that Tessa still kept his photograph hit Richard like a physical blow. She kept my picture? She talks to it sometimes when she thinks I'm asleep, Angel continued, apparently unaware that she was destroying and rebuilding her father's world with every word. She tells it about her day, and about me, and about how much she misses the man she married before the mean lady made him go crazy. Richard had to close his eyes against the wave of emotion that crashed over him. Even after everything, even after the years of abandonment and pain and struggle, Tessa still talked to his picture, still missed him, still believed somewhere, deep inside, that the man she had loved was worth missing. Angel, he said quietly, do you think Mama would be happier if I wasn't in your life? Angel's eyes widened with alarm. Are you going to leave again? No, Richard said quickly, pulling her into his arms. No, sweetheart, I'm never leaving you again. I want what's best for you and Mama, even if that means... It means staying, Angel interrupted fiercely. It means fighting for us, like Mama fought for me all those years. It means proving that love is stronger than hurt. Later that evening, Richard stood outside the modest apartment that Tessa and Angel now called home, a far cry from the basement hovel where he'd found them, but still a world away from the mansion where they should have been living all along. Through the window, he could see mother and daughter at their kitchen table, Angel doing homework while Tessa prepared dinner. It was such a normal, domestic scene, and it broke his heart that he was watching it from the outside, looking in. His phone buzzed with a text from his lawyer. Sophia's sentencing hearing moved to Friday. 25 years minimum. She'll die in prison. Richard stared at the message, waiting to feel satisfaction or relief or some sense of justice served. Instead, he felt only emptiness. Sophia's punishment couldn't undo the damage she had caused, couldn't give him back the years he'd lost with his family, couldn't erase the pain that still lived in Tessa's eyes every time she looked at him. A knock on his car window startled him from his thoughts. Tessa stood outside his Mercedes, wearing scrubs from her shift at the legal aid clinic and looking exhausted but determined. Richard rolled down the window, his heart racing. Is everything okay? Is Angel's fine, Tessa said. She's doing homework. I saw you sitting out here and thought, we need to talk. Okay, Richard said, stepping out of the car. Should we go somewhere private? Walk with me, Tessa said simply, heading toward the small park at the end of the block. They walked in silence for several minutes, the weight of unspoken words heavy between them. When they reached a bench overlooking a small pond, Tessa finally spoke. I heard about Sophia's sentencing, she said. 25 years. Justice served, I suppose, Richard replied, though his voice held no satisfaction. Is it? Tessa asked. Does her punishment make you feel better about what happened to us? Richard considered the question seriously. No, he said finally. Nothing can make up for what I did to you and Angel. Nothing can give us back those 7 years. Tessa was quiet for a long moment, watching ducks glide across the pond's surface. Angel asked me today if we were going to be a family again. What did you tell her? I told her that families come in all different shapes and that the most important thing is love and respect and commitment to each other's happiness. That's a good answer, Richard said. But it wasn't the answer she wanted, Tessa continued. She wants what every child wants, parents who love each other as much as they love her. Richard's heart clenched. Tessa, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but I've been going to therapy, she interrupted. Individual therapy, not just the family sessions for Angel's sake. Dr. Morrison has been helping me work through everything. And? Tessa turned to look at him directly for the first time in months. And she's helped me understand that I've been holding on to my anger because it felt safer than risking my heart again. That I've been punishing you not just for what you did, but for making me love someone who could hurt me so deeply. Richard felt tears burning his eyes. Tessa, I'm not ready to forgive you, she said quickly. I may never be ready, but I'm ready to try to heal, for Angel's sake and maybe for mine too. What does that mean? Tessa stood up, pacing to the edge of the pond. It means I'm willing to try family dinners, real ones, not just custody exchanges. It means I'm willing to go to Angel's school events together, to make decisions about her future as partners instead of adversaries. And us? Richard asked quietly. What about us? There is no us, Richard, Tessa said, but her voice was gentle rather than harsh. Not yet, maybe not ever. But there's Angel, and she deserves to see her parents working together, supporting each other, maybe even liking each other again. Richard stood and moved closer to her, careful not to invade her space. I'll take whatever you're willing to give, he said. Friendship, partnership, co-parenting, anything that means I get to be part of your lives. There are conditions, Tessa said, and Richard could hear the lawyer in her voice again. Of course. No more supervised visits, but no overnight stays until Angel is ready. No gifts that I haven't approved first. She needs to love you for who you are, not what you can buy her. And no lies, Richard, ever, about anything, even if you think the truth will hurt me, even if it makes you look bad. No more secrets between us. Agreed, Richard said without hesitation. And therapy, Tessa continued. Individual therapy for you, family therapy for all of us, and couples counseling if... She paused, her cheeks flushing slightly. If we ever get to a point where that becomes relevant. Whatever you need, Richard said. Whatever it takes. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sun set over the water. For the first time in months, the space between them didn't feel like a chasm filled with pain and regret. It felt like possibility. Angel says you look at me the way I look at your picture, Tessa said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard's heart stopped. She told you about the picture? She tells me everything, Tessa said with a small smile. That child has never met a secret she could keep. Do you? Look at my picture, I mean? Tessa was quiet for so long that Richard thought she wasn't going to answer. Then, barely audible, she said, Every night I tell it about my day, about Angel, about how proud I am of the man you're trying to become. Tessa, Richard breathed, taking a step closer. Don't, she said, holding up a hand to stop. Don't make this more than it is. I'm not ready for more, but... She looked at him with eyes that held the first spark of hope he'd seen since the custody hearing. But maybe someday I could be. As they walked back toward the apartment complex, Richard felt something he hadn't experienced in 7 years. Hope, not the desperate, grasping hope of a drowning man, but the quiet, steady hope of someone who had learned to value what he had, rather than mourn what he'd lost. He had his daughter's love, his ex-wife's tentative trust, and the chance to prove that redemption was possible for even the most broken of men. It wasn't the fairy tale ending that Angel dreamed about, but it was a beginning. And for now, a beginning was enough. Chapter 9. Healing the Broken Bonds. 11. Years after the reunion, the auditorium at Riverside High School buzzed with the excited energy of graduation day, but Richard Hubble only had eyes for one person in the sea of cap and gowns. Angel Ray, now 18 and valedictorian of her graduating class, stood at the podium, with the poise and confidence of someone who had learned early that strength came from surviving the impossible. But most of all, Angel was saying, her voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium, I want to thank my parents for teaching me that love isn't perfect, but it's persistent. That families aren't defined by who never leaves, but by who chooses to stay and fight for each other, even when it's hard. Richard felt tears burning his eyes as he watched his daughter, brilliant, beautiful, and impossibly wise, deliver her valedictory speech. Beside him, separated by careful distance but united in pride, Tessa wiped her own eyes with a tissue she'd been clutching since Angel's name was first called. 11 years. 11 years since that first supervised visit in the playground. 11 years of family dinners that slowly became less awkward. 11 years of school plays and soccer games and teenage drama that had somehow, against all odds, knitted them back into something resembling a family. Not the family Angel had dreamed of as a 7-year-old, perhaps. Not the fairy tale reunion where Mama and Daddy fell back in love and lived happily ever after. But something real and hard-won and precious, nonetheless. Flashback 5 years ago. Dad, I need to talk to you about something, 13-year-old Angel had said, her voice serious in that way that always made Richard's heart skip with parental anxiety. They were in his new apartment, modest by his former standards but warm and comfortable, filled with photos of Angel and artwork she'd made over the years. Richard had sold the mansion within months of Sophia's conviction, unable to bear living in the place where so much damage had been. "And Dan, what's on your mind, sweetheart?" Richard asked, setting aside the book he'd been reading. Angel took a deep breath. "I know about the business stuff, about Mom owning part of your company, about how she could have taken everything but didn't." Richard's stomach dropped. "Angel!" "I'm not stupid, Dad," Angel continued, her voice matter-of-fact. "I've known for years that Mom's not just a lawyer helping poor people. I've seen the financial statements she leaves on her desk sometimes. I know she's rich too now, maybe richer than you. How do you feel about that?" Richard asked carefully. Angel was quiet for a moment, considering her words with the thoughtfulness that still amazed him. "I think it's awesome," she said finally. "I think Mom is the strongest person in the world, and I think she deserves everything good that's ever happened to her. And what about me? How do you feel about what I did to you and your mother?" "I think you were sick," Angel said simply. "I think Grandma Sophia was evil, and she made you sick, and I think you've spent the last 5 years trying to get better. And I think—" She paused, her young face scrunching with the effort of expressing complex emotions. "I think you and Mom still love each other, but you're both too scared to admit it. Present day. Graduation. Which is why I've decided to attend Stanford University in the fall, where I'll be studying pre-med with a focus on pediatric psychology. Because if my family has taught me anything, it's that healing is possible even when it seems impossible. Thank you." The auditorium erupted in applause as Angel stepped down from the podium, her radiant smile finding Richard and Tessa in the crowd. She had grown into a stunning young woman, tall like her father, graceful like her mother, with an inner light that had never been dimmed despite the shadows of her early childhood. "She's incredible," Tessa whispered, leaning slightly toward Richard in her excitement. "I can't believe she got into Stanford with a full scholarship." "She's her mother's daughter," Richard replied, meaning it completely. "Brilliant, determined, and capable of anything she sets her mind to." For a moment, their shared pride bridged the careful distance they'd maintained for 11 years. Their hands almost touched on the armrest between their seats before Tessa caught herself and pulled away, the moment of connection dissolving back into polite co-parenting. But Richard had felt it, that spark, that recognition, that echo of what they'd once been to each other. And from Tessa's slight flush, he knew she'd felt it too. Flashback, 3 years ago. "I got asked to prom," 15-year-old Angel announced over dinner at their weekly family meal, a tradition that had evolved from awkward obligation to genuine pleasure over the years. By who? Richard and Tessa, us simultaneously, then looked at each other with the shared amusement of parents whose protective instincts had kicked in. Marcus Chen from my AP chemistry class, Angel said, her eyes dancing with mischief as she watched her parents' synchronized reaction. He's really sweet, and he's already been accepted to MIT. MIT, huh? Richard said, trying to sound casual. That's impressive. And chemistry class, Tessa added, so he's smart. Are you two seriously tag-teaming me right now? Angel laughed. This is ridiculous. You're like a married couple when it comes to embarrassing me. The observation hung in the air, and Richard saw Tessa's face flush slightly. They had fallen into such natural patterns over the years, sharing parenting duties, making decisions together, presenting a united front on everything from curfews to college choices. To an outside observer, they probably did look like a married odd couple. They just weren't married to each other. We just want you to be safe and happy, Tessa said finally. And if this Marcus kid hurts you, he'll have to answer to both of us, Richard added, making Angel roll her eyes dramatically. God, you two are worse than actual married parents, she muttered, but she was smiling as she said it. Present day, after graduation. The graduation party was held at Tessa's house, no longer the modest apartment, but a beautiful colonial in the suburbs that she'd bought with the profits from her expanding business empire. The backyard was filled with Angel's friends, teachers and family, all celebrating the remarkable young woman she'd become. Richard stood by the buffet table, watching Angel hold court among her classmates, when Tessa appeared beside him with 2 glasses of champagne. She's going to change the world, Tessa said, handing him a glass. Just like her mother, Richard replied, accepting the drink gratefully. They stood in comfortable silence, watching their daughter laugh with her friends. Over the years, these moments of peace between them had become more frequent, the sharp edges of old pain slowly worn smooth by time and shared experiences. Richard, Tessa said suddenly, her voice careful, I want you to know I'm proud of the father you've become. Angel is lucky to have you in her life. The words hit Richard like a physical force. In 11 years of co-parenting, Tessa had never said anything so openly positive about him as a person rather than just as Angel's father. That means everything to me, he said quietly. Coming from you, it means everything. I know I haven't been easy to work with, Tessa continued, her eyes still fixed on Angel. I know I've kept walls up, kept you at arm's length, even when you were trying to build bridges. You had every right to protect yourself, Richard said. I destroyed your trust. I went on a date last week, Tessa said suddenly, the words tumbling out in a rush. Richard felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. Oh, Dr. Williams from the hospital. He's been asking for months, and I finally said yes. Tessa glanced at Richard, trying to read his expression. It was nice. He's a good man. Kind, stable, never been married, wants children. That's good, Richard managed, though the words felt like ground glass in his throat. You deserve to be happy, Tessa. You deserve someone who... I kept comparing him to you, Tessa interrupted, her voice barely audible above the sounds of celebration around them. The entire evening, I kept thinking about how different he was from you, how safe he felt, how uncomplicated everything would be with someone like him. Richard's heart was hammering so hard he was sure she could hear it. And I realized that I don't want safe and uncomplicated, Tessa said, finally turning to meet his eyes. I realized that some part of me has been waiting all these years for you to become the man I could love again. Tessa, I'm not ready, she said quickly. I may never be ready. But I wanted you to know that it's not because you haven't changed. or because you haven't proven yourself as a father. It's because I'm terrified of hoping for something I might lose again." Before Richard could respond, Angel appeared beside them, her face glowing with excitement and champagne. "What are you two talking about so seriously?" she asked, slipping her arms around both her parents' waists. "This is supposed to be a party." "Just telling your dad how proud we are of you," Tessa said, her voice steady, despite the emotional conversation they'd just had. "Both of you together?" Angel asked, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Like a team, like partners, like parents who love you very much," Richard interrupted, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Now go enjoy your party, Dr. Ray." "I'm not Dr. Ray yet," Angel laughed, but she squeezed them both tighter. "But I love the sound of it." As she danced away to rejoin her friends, Richard and Tessa were left alone again, the weight of unspoken words heavy between them. "She's going to keep pushing," Tessa said quietly. "She's been pushing for years, trying to get us back together." "I know," Richard replied, "and I don't want her to think that's her responsibility." "But she's not wrong, is she?" Tessa asked, her voice so soft he almost didn't hear her. "About us, I mean. About there still being something here worth fighting for." Richard turned to face her fully. This woman who had survived everything he'd put her through and emerged stronger, more beautiful, more incredible than ever. "There's never been anything else for me, Tessa," he said simply. "Not in 11 years. Not in 20 years. Not ever. You and Angel are my whole world. But I won't push you, I won't pressure you, and I won't let Angel think she needs to fix us." "What if I want to try?" Tessa whispered. "What if I'm finally ready to see if we can be more than just Angel's parents?" "Then we try," Richard said, his heart soaring with hope and terror in equal measure. "We try, and we see what happens, and we promise each other that no matter what, Angel comes first." "Angel comes first," Tessa agreed. And for the first time in 11 years, she didn't pull away when Richard reached out to touch her face. As they stood there in the fading light of their daughter's graduation party, surrounded by the sounds of celebration and joy, Richard Hubble finally understood what redemption really meant. It wasn't just about earning forgiveness for past mistakes. It was about becoming worthy of the love that had been waiting for him all along, and maybe it was about getting a second chance at the fairy tale ending that Angel had been dreaming of since she was 7 years old. Chapter 10. Love's Final Test. 1 year after graduation, Angel is 19. The coffee shop near Stanford's campus was Angel's favorite place to study, but today she wasn't surrounded by textbooks and medical journals. Instead, she sat across from her parents, separately as always, having what she had privately dubbed the most important conversation of my life, parts 1 and 2. Richard arrived first, as punctual as ever, wearing the casual clothes that had replaced his corporate armor years ago. At 47, he was still handsome, but there was a gentleness in his face now that the old Richard had never possessed. The pharmaceutical fog that had once clouded his eyes had been replaced by clarity, wisdom, and a deep sadness that never quite disappeared. "You sounded serious on the phone," he said, sliding into the booth across from her. "Everything okay? With school, with Marcus?" Angel smiled at the mention of her boyfriend, now fiancé, though her parents didn't know that yet. Marcus Chen had proven himself worthy of the impossible standards her protective parents had set, earning their grudging approval through 2 years of patient courtship and unwavering devotion to their daughter. "Dad," Angel said, her voice carrying the same serious tone that had preceded important conversations since she was 8 years old. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to really listen. Not as my father, but as a man who's been trying to heal for 12 years. Richard's expression grew concerned. "Angel, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," she said quickly. "Everything's right, actually. But I need you to promise me something before I tell you what it is." "Anything." Angel reached across the table and took his hands, hands that had once thrown her and her mother into a blizzard, but which had spent the last 12 years trying to make amends for that unforgivable moment. "Promise me that you'll stop punishing yourself for what happened when I was a baby," she said quietly. "Promise me that you'll finally forgive the man you were, so you can be the man you are now." Richard's eyes filled with tears. "Angel, you've been my hero for 12 years, Dad. Not because you're perfect, but because you never stopped trying to be better. And I need you to see yourself the way I see you, the way Mom sees you, even though she's too scared to admit it." "What are you saying?" Angel took a deep breath. "I'm saying that Marcus proposed to me last week, and I said yes. And I'm saying that I want both my parents to walk me down the aisle together, as a family, because that's what we've always been, even when we pretended we weren't." 2 hours later, the same booth held a different conversation. Tessa sat where Richard had been, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. At 38, she was more beautiful than ever, success and confidence having added layers of strength to her natural grace. "Engaged," she repeated, her voice a mixture of joy and panic. "Angel, honey, you're only 19, you have medical school ahead of you, your whole life." "Mom," Angel interrupted gently, "I love him, really, truly, completely love him. The way you loved Dad before everything went wrong." Tessa's breath caught. In all their years of careful co-parenting, Angel had rarely mentioned the romantic relationship between her parents, respecting the boundaries they'd established. "That's different," Tessa said quietly. "Your father and we had a complicated situation. You had Grandma Sophia poisoning your marriage from the inside," Angel said bluntly. "But that doesn't mean the love wasn't real. It doesn't mean it's not still real. Angel, I've watched you for 19 years, Mom. I've seen how you look. At Dad, when you think no one's watching. I've seen how you've never seriously dated anyone, how you make excuses every time someone asks you out. I've heard you talking to his picture when you thought I was asleep." Tessa's face flushed. "You're too young to understand." "I understand that you're terrified of being hurt again," Angel said firmly. "I understand that Dad destroyed your trust, and it took years to rebuild even a friendship. But I also understand that you still love him, and he still loves you, and the only thing keeping you apart is fear. Some things can't be fixed, sweetheart. Some hurts run too deep." Angel leaned forward, her green eyes, so like her father's, blazing with determination. "Then prove it. Prove that some hurts are too deep to heal by walking me down the aisle with Dad, by standing together as my parents for one perfect day, by showing me that love can't conquer everything, so I don't spend my marriage with Marcus believing in fairy tales." The challenge hung in the air between them, and Tessa recognized her own legal tactics being used against her by her brilliant daughter. "That's manipulation," she said, but there was admiration in her voice. "That's love," Angel corrected. "That's a daughter who wants to see her parents happy, together or apart, but happy. And Mom, you haven't been truly happy in 20 years. 6 months later, the wedding day. The garden venue was perfect, intimate, elegant, and filled with white flowers that seemed to glow in the late afternoon sun. Angel had planned everything herself, with input from both parents, but careful attention to creating something that belonged to her and Marcus, rather than to anyone's expectations or past disappointments. Richard stood in the groom's quarters, adjusting his tie for the 10th time, when Marcus appeared beside him. "Nervous?" the young man asked, though he seemed calm despite it being his wedding day. "Terrified," Richard admitted. "But not about you marrying my daughter. About what happens after." Marcus, brilliant, kind, and wise beyond his 21 years, had figured out the family dynamics long ago. "Angel told you about her request? Walking her down the aisle with Tessa?" "Yeah." Richard's hands shook slightly as he tried once again. To get his tie right. I don't know if I can do it, Marcus. I don't know if I can stand that close to her, pretend we're a happy family, and then go back to being polite strangers afterward. What if you didn't have to go back? Marcus asked quietly. Richard looked at him sharply. What do you mean? I mean, what if Angel's right about her mother? What if Tessa's just as scared as you are, but willing to take the risk for Angel's sake? What if today is your chance to finally stop punishing yourselves for the past and start building a future? In the bridal suite, Angel stood before a full-length mirror, radiant in a simple but elegant wedding dress that somehow managed to honor both her parents' styles. Tessa stood behind her, making final adjustments to her daughter's veil, tears streaming down her face. "You're the most beautiful bride I've ever seen," Tessa whispered. "I'd look like you," Angel said, meeting her mother's eyes in the mirror. "Everyone always says I look like Dad, but I see you in my face too, especially when I'm determined to get my way." "Speaking of getting your way," Tessa said, her voice carefully controlled, "are you sure about this walking down the aisle thing? I don't want your wedding day to be about your parents' drama." Angel turned around, taking her mother's hands in both of hers. "Mom, do you love Dad?" The question was so direct, so simple, that Tessa couldn't hide behind her usual deflections. "Yes," she whispered. "God help me, yes, I still love him. And do you think he loves you?" Yes, I think he does." "Then why are you both so determined to be miserable?" Angel asked, her voice gentle but firm. "Why are you both choosing to be alone when you could choose to be together?" "Because I'm terrified," Tessa admitted, the words torn from somewhere, deep inside. "Because losing him the first time nearly killed me, and I don't think I could survive it again." "What if you didn't have to lose him?" Angel asked. "What if this time you both fought for each other instead of letting other people's poison win?" The ceremony was supposed to begin at 4 o'clock, but at 3:58 Angel was nowhere to be found. Richard and Tessa had been waiting in the garden's entrance, maintaining their careful distance, when Angel's maid of honor rushed up to them in a panic. "She's not in the bridal suite," Sarah gasped. "She's not anywhere. Marcus is freaking out. The guests are starting to murmur. Where could she be?" Richard and Tessa looked at each other, and in that moment of shared parental panic, all their walls came down. "The old oak tree," they said simultaneously. They found her there, sitting beneath the massive tree at the edge of the garden, still in her wedding dress, but with her shoes off and her feet in the grass. She looked up when she heard them approaching, and her face was streaked with tears. "Angel." Tessa rushed to her side. "Sweetheart, what's wrong? Are you having second thoughts about Marcus?" "I'm not having second thoughts about Marcus," Angel said quietly. "I'm having second thoughts about everything else." Richard knelt beside his daughter, his heart breaking at the sight of her tears. "Talk to us, baby girl. What's going on?" "I realized something," Angel said, looking back and forth between her parents. "I realized that I've been so focused on getting you two back together that I forgot to ask if that's what you really want. I've been manipulating you, pushing you, trying to force a fairy tale ending because that's what I wanted, not because it's what you needed." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smudging her carefully applied makeup. "And I'm scared that if I walk down that aisle with both of you, and then you go back to being strangers afterward, I'll have turned my wedding day into another reminder of what we can't have, instead of a celebration of what we do have." Tessa and Richard exchanged a look over their daughter's head, a look full of love, regret, hope, and 20 years of unfinished business. "Angel," Tessa said quietly, "what if I told you that your father and I have been talking, really talking, not just about parenting decisions or your college plans, but about us?" Angel's head snapped up. "You have?" "For months," Richard added. "Ever since your graduation, we've been figuring things out, slowly, carefully, but honestly. We've been going to counseling together, Tessa continued. Not couples therapy exactly, but sessions focused on healing the past so we can build a future. Whatever kind of future that might be, Angel's eyes widened. You've been seeing Dr. Morrison together for months, and you didn't tell me? We wanted to be sure, Richard said. We wanted to know if what we were feeling was real or just nostalgia and wishful thinking. We didn't want to get your hopes up if we couldn't make it work. And, Angel asked, her voice barely a whisper. Tessa looked at Richard, and he nodded encouragingly. And we've realized that some love is strong enough to survive anything, even betrayal, even abandonment, even 20 years of being apart. Are you saying what I think you're saying? Angel breathed. We're saying that after this wedding is over, after you and Marcus are off on your honeymoon, your father and I are going to start dating, Tessa said, her face glowing with happiness and terror in equal measure. Really dating like teenagers who are terrified and excited and completely crazy about each other. Angel let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and threw her arms around both her parents. You mean it? You're really going to try? We mean it, Richard said, his voice thick with emotion. We're going to try to be what we should have been 20 years ago. What we would have been if we'd been stronger, braver, and less willing to let other people destroy what we had. But first, Tessa said, pulling back to look at her daughter, we need to get you married to that wonderful young man who's probably convinced you've run away and left him at the altar. Angel laughed, wiping her eyes and somehow managing to look radiant despite her smudged makeup. Do you think we can still pull off the walking down the aisle together thing, even though I've kept everyone waiting and probably look like a raccoon? Sweetheart, Richard said, helping her to her feet, you could be covered in mud and you'd still be the most beautiful bride who ever lived. And yes, Tessa added, taking Angel's other arm, we can absolutely walk you down the aisle together, as a family. As the family we've always been, even when we were too scared to admit it. The wedding ceremony was everything Angel had dreamed of and more. She walked down the aisle between her parents, all three of them crying happy tears, while Marcus waited at the altar with a smile that could have powered the entire venue. But the moment that would live in everyone's memory forever came during the reception, when Angel stood to give her speech. A year ago, she began, her voice clear and strong, I asked my parents to walk me down the aisle together, not because I wanted to manipulate them into getting back together, but because I wanted them to remember what it felt like to be a team, to be partners, to be the family that love created, even when that love got lost for a while. She paused, looking at Richard and Tessa, who were sitting together at the parents' table, holding hands for the first time in 20 years. Today, they didn't just walk me down the aisle. They reminded me, and everyone here, that some love stories don't end when the characters make mistakes. Some love stories are strong enough to survive anything, even 20 years of separation, because real love isn't about being perfect. It's about choosing each other again and again, even when it's hard. She raised her champagne glass, her eyes shining with joy. So here's to second chances, to love that never dies, and to fairy tale endings that are worth waiting for. And here's to my parents, who taught me that the best love stories are the ones where the characters have to fight for their happy ending. As the reception continued around them, Richard and Tessa slipped away to the garden, to the same oak tree, where they'd found Angel before the ceremony. Are we really doing this? Tessa asked, her hand still in his. Are we really going to try again? Are you scared? Richard asked. Terrified, she admitted. Good, he said, pulling her closer. That means it matters. That means it's real. What if we mess it up again? Then we'll fix it again, Richard said simply, however many times it takes, for however long it takes. Because Angel was right, some love is worth fighting for. And Tessa, you are worth fighting for. You've always been worth fighting for. As the sun set over their daughter's wedding, Richard Hubble kissed Tessa Ray for the first time in 20 years, and both of them finally understood what their daughter had known all along, that love doesn't end when it gets broken. It just learns how to heal stronger than before. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very patient and very willing to forgive, it comes back stronger than ever.